So why does paying attention matter? Why is it important? Odell writes, a social body that can't concentrate or communicate with itself is like a person who can't think or act. So when she's talking about a social body, obviously she's talking about a group of people. And if people can't focus on a goal and act collectively, it's the same thing as an individual who has that same problem. So imagine, I mean, that's a very kind of troubling concept, but it's true. If we don't have the ability to act in a coordinated way as a society, like how is progress or peace or well-being possible? The social distancing example applies here too. Like if people can't be compelled to act in such a way that'll protect the society from the spread of disease, like then we're just subject to whatever the disease has for us. We can't protect ourselves. So what does this have to do with leisure? Let's bring it back to the top of the class, right? I know you guys are all wondering why we're talking about this. Well, because our attention is the number one commodity being fought over by tech and media companies. And that attention is there for them to fight over during our leisure time. Our leisure time is the kind of golden commodity that these companies are trying to win. And so we are constantly basically, we individually are the sites of battles between these tech companies who are trying to get us to pay attention to their apps, their devices, their media, their content. And so it's all happening in front of our eyes, and they're working very hard to compel us to pay attention to them. So it's our attention. We get to control it. But do we? When there are so many incredibly well-funded interests working really hard to gain control of our attention, it becomes a lot harder for us to do what we want to do with it. We have less and less control over how we direct our attention and how we direct our care and our focus. And so the act of doing nothing, as Jenny Odell describes it, is an act of resistance against, in a lot of ways, these huge companies that are trying to make money from our eyeballs and where our eyeballs go. And these companies are all part of what we call the attention economy. These are the digital worlds that we inhabit, and they are monetized. They are basically, money is earned based on the amount of time that we spend using them. So that model is what we are subject to. If the model for earning money for media companies was not based on the amount of time that we spent using them, the whole nature of this kind of conflict between these companies and our attention would be different. But the fact that advertising is based on literally the amount of time that you spend looking at an ad that is served to you on a feed that you're scrolling through is basically has created the hegemony that determines how the attention economy works. So our attention, your eyeballs and where they go, is a valuable commodity. Anyone who has ever worked in programming, like app programming, can tell you that a lot of work is put into mapping where users' eyeballs go on a screen and designing particular digital experiences to direct your eyeballs to particular places. And this is all really, really sophisticated and effective. It's very hard to resist the way that programmers want your eyeballs to move when you're in a digital space. And that's because where you look and what you focus on is how people make money. So all of this digital stimulation makes doing nothing really hard. We call it distraction, but actually our devices are designed to attract us to rest our focus towards whatever they're serving us. And mobile devices and the apps that we use on them were programmed to give us very kind of carefully engineered experiences and dopamine experiences. So like the whole scroll down to refresh function of our phones is based on the experience that people have using slot machines at casinos. You pull down the lever and the different symbols start spinning, and then they all kind of land, and it's a new array of symbols, right? And that kind of experience of pulling down and seeing the new symbols array themselves is deeply satisfying from like a brain chemical perspective. And that's exactly the same kind of sensation that programmers were looking for when they designed the scroll down to refresh feature on our devices. So doing nothing in 2020 almost always involves feeding stimuli into our brains. And this is really consequential for our ability to experience joy and peace when we're at rest. Everyone knows the feeling of kind of slight agitation that comes from, like, looking at your phone for too long. It makes it hard to sleep. It makes it hard to do anything, honestly. And so Odell is really talking about kind of developing and honing our ability to resist that. I mean, right now, how many of you guys are also on your phones? I know that probably more than half of you, as you're listening to this lecture, are also on your phones. So, I mean, that's all the evidence that we need. And you're not on your phones because you're rude or because there's anything weird or unusual about you. What you're doing is completely normal. Everyone does it, right? But it's highly consequential, and it's a symptom of a set of conditions where our attention is just being monopolized by interests that are not our own. But when you're stressed out and you're afraid and you're feeling precarious and you're feeling like, your future isn't certain, it's very hard to resist the kind of relaxing experience of scrolling through your phone. Precarious workers, students in Jenny Odell's class, these are people that experience economic stress. And it's a kind of a permanent, free-floating anxiety that people feel. And if you keep people in that state of kind of being on their toes and being anxious about the future and not feeling like they really have the energy or the mental space to really invest anything beyond themselves and their immediate survival, you have a population that's easier to control because that population is reactive. They're not able to kind of stop and then consider a more collective action, being part of a collective. They're really just thinking about just getting through, the immediate future. So paying attention is hard for, a good part of the world. And Odell reminds us that it's a privilege to be able to pay attention, to get that clarity, to kind of insist on taking space for your own mind. And she says, if you can afford to, you should, but not everyone can afford to. Some people who are, the precarious workers of the world who are, really just trying to get through the day and like make the money that they need to absolutely satisfy their basic needs. These are not people who can easily decide, you know what, I'm going to actually start paying attention to bird songs, and I'm going to take time out of my day to sit in a park and listen to the birds. I mean, that's not a privilege that they have access to. So that's also worth keeping in mind.